You want more on the Avs? You got it.
Honestly, does it really matter right now?
That's the problem, right?
No, just about anybody can get in front of a microphone and talk about hockey. How on earth do you get involved in something like this?
It was kind of a fluke.
It's funny that this podcast is going off the rails so quickly.
This is From the Cheap Seats, an Avalanche fan podcast from 9 News. Seated in the conference room, here are your hosts, Steve Stager and Jeff Sautel.
Boy, I've been waiting to turn these microphones on for several days.
It's been a busy week.
It's been an infuriating weekend leading into a busy week. We cannot start an Avalanche podcast, even though we're a week behind, without talking about the injury to Matt Calvert and what happened in the game in Vancouver in the final seconds of the game.
And more importantly, what didn't happen.
And let me get this out there before anything happens. First of all, I'll describe the situation. If you didn't see what happened, I hope you have by now. But final minutes of the game, Vancouver's down 2-0. They pull their goalie. They're in the zone with a 6-on-5. And in that moment, Elias Pettersson hits a shot to dump it in the zone, ends up dumping it off the back of Matt Calvert's head. Calvert falls to the ice, and then he's on the ice. Elias Pettersson skates up to him and is kind of looking down at him and looking at the referee, but play still keeps going. In fact, play goes on, I believe, and I haven't timed it, but I think from what I've read, mostly it's about 14 seconds after that injury. You watch Matt Calvert on the ground try to get up once and then fall back to the ground. Play still keeps going until eventually the Vancouver Canucks score. Now, let me get this out there because I don't want anyone out there to think that I'm complaining about this because the Canucks scored. I don't care about that. What I made very, very clear that night, and if any of you follow me on Twitter, I apologize because I was tweeting like a madman on Saturday night while I'm sitting here at work. Then I had to anchor a newscast. All sorts of upset. But the point I'm trying to get to is here we are in 2019 when we have people doing research on concussions and the terrible things that they can do to someone. And you have a guy on the ice who is injured, who is bleeding out of his head and can't seem to get up. And the NHL doesn't appear to think that that is a serious enough condition to blow the play dead until a trainer can get onto the ice and tend to Matt Calvert. Now, I may be as emotional about this because Matt Calvert's one of my favorite players. I think I'd be this emotional about it if it was anyone. I honestly think I might feel like this if it was a Vancouver Canuck who was on the ice in that game. What we saw in that moment, and I'm not going to pretend to be in their shoes because I don't know what they actually saw and when but what we saw in that moment as an organization is absolutely unacceptable. And I'm going to editorialize on that, and I'm going to give you the baseline line here that I am not a journalist who covers the Colorado Avalanche. I'm a fan in this podcast, and I have been from the beginning. Every now and then I'll do a story. I always leave my bias on the outside, but I think the whole league could kind of look at that moment and say there was something wrong there.
And if you were following it on Twitter that night, you had players from pretty much every other team chiming in and saying this is unacceptable. And these are teams. Winooski from Columbus was one that jumped out to me, saying, "I don't care who you are, who you're playing. This has to be a stoppage." I mean, that's an Eastern Conference team. They have nothing riding on the outcome of this. This is just recognizing that, it's a player safety thing. You cannot put someone's health and, frankly, you're taking a slap shot to the back of the head. That you're putting your life in jeopardy at that point.
You are, because you're down on the ice and the puck is still moving.
Yeah.
You have a piece of hard plastic being fired at 90 miles an hour by a bunch of guys who are skating around you and, frankly, who are desperate in that moment to score a goal because it's the end of a hockey game and they want to tie it up.
Yeah.
And they ended up tying it up. And then Nate McKinnon ended it very quickly in OT. Quickly after that, he gets on Hockey Night in Canada with an interview with Scott Oak and just kind of lets loose. He talks to the media after the game. And it was unacceptable. I don't know how else to put it. It's unacceptable. And the fact that I have not seen the league specifically address this, I think the head of officiating said something about it and mischaracterized it completely. makes me worry that the league is not going to think about this because hockey seasons are long. And here we are in November. Makes me wonder if the league, by the time the Stanley Cup is won at the end of June or middle of June, and then they go into those meetings where they're talking about rule changes, are they actually going to address this?
And this is the situation where the fan base needs to step up and say, we don't think this is acceptable. The fans are the ones that put all the money into it. If they say this is an issue we need you to address, the NHL almost has to. And unfortunately, this is something that is going to happen through the remainder of the season. Other teams, other players are going to have similar situations. Maybe not exact, maybe it'll get whistled down, but the issue of concussions in hockey has slowly been getting more attention, and you have to wonder what that tipping point is going to be, where it stops being something that gets talked about in the pregame analysis, and then we just enjoy the game, and becomes something that the NHL is being made aware of constantly to the point where they are forced to do something.
Because they're not.
Absolutely not.
In this case, it's clear. Because this is the second time this season that something like that has happened to the Colorado Avalanche.
Second time this month.
The first was Nikita Zadorov taking a puck to the face.
Yeah.
And is down on the ice. He ended up getting back up. But minutes later, he was on the ice for a while bleeding from his face. I mean, the fact that the league doesn't seem to be taking this seriously, I don't understand. We talked a bit about McKinnon's response. Eric Johnson also had a very, very strong worded response, and he spoke to a very trustworthy reporter who we've talked to before on this show. Ryan S. Clark from The Athletic joining us now, or should I say Ryan S. Clark. Ryan S. Clark. Ryan, that's how we were instructed to introduce you moving forward, right, Ryan?
No habla inglés, que habla español. No comprende es NHL.
Oh, I've appeared to dial the wrong number. Ryan, you were the first one in the locker room in the Vancouver game to chat with Eric Johnson and get some really spicy stuff for him. Kind of describe to me your evening from the Calvert incident up to the point where you get in the locker room.
Sure. And I'm going to try to describe this in the most G-rated way possible, because I think for anyone who read the story or saw Eric Johnson's quote on social, you know that there was certainly some incendiary remarks made. So the game itself, the Avalanche are up 4-2. Calvert, of course, blocks the shot with the back of his head from Elias Pettersson. And it's something that, with where I was standing with the Altitude television crew, we were all watching off of a monitor. But at the same time, where the monitor was, you can hear what's going on because it's in front of the hallway that the players used to get from the bench to the dressing room. And so you could hear just the crowd, the bench, the whole nine, as you're watching this on a monitor. And the thing that was really interesting was when it was seeing Matt Calvert come off the ice, I was able to peek down the tunnel, and there he is with blood streaming down his face. It was on his sweater. He was walking. He appeared coherent, but again, it was just, you only saw maybe a couple seconds of it before the game resumed, and of course we saw how it ended. Now, as for what happened after the game, so outside the Avalanche's dressing room, there's a hallway over at Rogers, and so it's a cramped hallway because there's a lot going on. So to my left, there was Nathan McKinnon talking with Scott Oak at the end of the Hockey Night in Canada telecast. About to the front of me, about to the front, just off to the left, was Eric Johnson on radio speaking with Connor McGahey, who was still in the booth. And to the right, you had Andre Burakovsky doing a live interview with Lauren Jabbar on Altitude Television. And the Burakovsky-Jabbar interview, I can't really say this, I couldn't really hear what was said because the Johnson and McKinnon discussions were louder, and it was a little bit more intriguing because with McKinnon and Scott Oak, McKinnon really spoke about the Calvert incident and was like, look, do you think what would happen if this had been LeBron James?
Yeah.
And it was just sort of the sort of like raw live moment where for anyone who was within earshot or people watching on TV, you might have been surprised to hear Nathan McKinnon say this. And then with Eric Johnson, again, I'm going to try to edit this as much as I can, given that we're doing a podcast. with Eric Johnson, he was speaking with Connor McGahey, and he was saying this was an effing joke. And we all know that in this industry that you can jump on a headset with someone and you can say whatever before it actually goes live or starts recording. And initially it seemed that way, but then when I spoke with Connor McGahey afterwards, he was like, no, Eric Johnson said that live on air. And he was like, unfortunately, we have a 7-second delay button, which allows them to just kind of be able to mute and edit those things out. So once those three were done, everybody went into the dressing room. And it was one of those things where, because again, there was so much going on that night beyond the Calvert hit, a lot of people had to go talk to other folks like Nazem Kadri, Antoine Vivol. And I was able to get Eric Johnson. I was the only person who spoke with Eric Johnson. And I mean, he was just extremely upfront with how he felt about, look, like, this is a problem. And if this is a league that cares about player safety, you would do what you can to make sure that play is blown dead, especially because of what happened with Nikita Zadorov, who, look, he got hit in the face in the Nashville game. I mean, he still has a scar from the shot where he took it. And not only that, but like Vancouver was his first game. And even then, like when you think about just the way Nikita Zadorov sounded Saturday during morning skate, like you could hear him, but he wasn't his loud, boisterous self. Like it was a little bit more muted. It's gotten better over the last few days. But again, like Eric Johnson was just frustrated because this just happened. He cares about player safety. And I mean, same thing with Nathan McKinnon. And so, yeah, that was really just kind of it. And then, of course, it's a story that, how do you put this? Avalanche fans care about for obvious reasons, or maybe people who had been watching that game. But then to see like how much of an impact it had throughout the league, especially when it came to a player safety issue, what the ref should have done, was the referee following the letter of the law? I mean, it led to some really interesting discussions about just what ended up being a 5-second sequence lasted for, like, let's say a 48 to 72 hour conversation.
And the NHL has a history of taking forever to change rules. Is something like this, I hate to say it, but enough to get them to talk about this at least?
It's interesting just because no one really knows what the thought process is going to be. I mean, you would think that maybe after something like this, more general managers, or better yet, even more players would lobby to their general managers about possibly trying to get this rule changed. Just because, again, if you're Joe Sakic in the Avalanche, you have two examples just in the last 2 weeks alone. One with Nikita Zadorov, which, again, he was able to skate under his own power, get back to the bench, and then go receive treatment. And another, Matt Calvert, which, I mean, I think he tried getting up, at least twice, and he just simply couldn't. And again, it goes back to more than just, okay, it's what happened in a game. For a lot of these players, it's a player safety issue. And something that was so telling was Nathan McKinnon saying, Matthew Calvert is one of the toughest players I've played with. He wouldn't make something like this up. He wouldn't fake it. And when you think about Matt Calvert, you think so much to his first season with the Avs last year, but really that defining moment being that game in San Jose where he held onto the puck long enough to get it to McKinnon, and Brent Burns just leveled him. And Matt Calvert's 5'11", let's say 195, 198. Brent Burns is 6'5" and north of 220.
Jeez.
And that was a serious hit Matt Calvert took, and it's what really saw him go in and out of the lineup for the rest of that series against the San Jose Sharks. So they know that this is a player that is so tough that if he can't get up, they see it as a severe problem. So maybe the rule gets changed, maybe it stays the same. But after what happened this past weekend, and as well as Nikita Zadorov a couple games prior, you would think the Avalanche would be a team that would be pushing for change.
But it sounds like the talk of the league, if you hear from the head of officiating, and I believe this was a recent quote. Some of the things I was reading this week were old quotes from Gary Bettman from meetings in May, but I thought I saw a new quote from the head of officiating that made it seem like he didn't understand the situation, because he was talking about this incident going on over 4 or 5 seconds, which really it was a 14-second situation. I think even 17 seconds since the shot, 14 seconds of him pretty much being down on the ice. It doesn't seem like that it's reverberating in the league enough. Is that an accurate depiction, or am I off here?
It's hard to say, because how often do you see these incidents? And it's like anything. It's one of those. if it doesn't happen enough, is it something that's discussed? But when it does happen, that's when it generates conversation. And so for the Colorado Avalanche, this might have been a subject that maybe 3-4 weeks ago players potentially had an opinion upon. But after watching what happened with Nikita Zadorov and then Matt Calvert, I mean, those feelings have probably amplified and intensified. So again, it's so hard to say like what the pulse on something like this is, because again, it's been one of those issues that hasn't really been widely discussed. But after what happened this past Saturday, it is something that is being discussed. Because again, let's just go back to Nikita Zadorov being kind of the first example in all this. It happened to Nikita Zadorov, but it wasn't really kind of, how do I put this? Like there was concern, but it wasn't to the same level as Matt Calvert, because yes, Nikita Zadorov bled, and it seems kind of, I guess, strange to maybe argue this point, because again, both were really gruesome to see. But maybe for some, you could argue, okay, Zadorov takes a shot off the face. It's a broken jaw. He bleeds, but he's able to skate off under his own power, and he's practicing with the team just a few days later. Whereas if with Matt Calvert, it's the back of the head. There's more blood on the ice. And not only that, but it happened in front of more eyeballs because it was the late game of Hockey Night in Canada. And because of just the images of Matt Calvert trying to get up, it's the images of Eric Johnson and Nathan MacKinnon being visibly furious that play was allowed to continue. And it was in a game that, again, that ended up being 5-4, and it played a role in why this game went from the Avalanche having a 2-goal lead to having to win in overtime. I mean, maybe those are the factors that kind of lead to why it was the way it was.
You're a bit like a hockey encyclopedia, so I feel like I can ask you this question. Can they make a rule change mid-season, or is that something that has to wait until the off-season?
It seems like there would possibly be something that would have to wait until the off-season. Now, it's not to say that we haven't seen rule changes in hockey before. Really, the first example that comes to mind, just because we're having this podcast while I'm sitting in Minneapolis, was I covered high school hockey here in Minnesota. Oh God, what must have felt like 7 years now. And there was a player, Jack Jablonski, who played at Benilde St. Margaret, who he took a check from behind and was immediately paralyzed. I believe from the waist down. Pardon me if that's inaccurate, but he was paralyzed, and he's worked to kind of get back to where he was as best as he could. And from that, you saw tighter checking rules that were passed by the high school league here in Minnesota, but those rules were short-lived because the team I covered, Moorhead High School, the game before the Jablonski incident, I mean, it was more or less kind of a clean game, just typical hitting you'd see in high school. And then after, I mean, the Jablonski rules passed, like that game was interrupted what felt like at least every 2 or 3 minutes, because checks that were deemed legal last game were deemed to be a problem this game, and people kept going in and out of the box. So it doesn't seem like a rule change would come right away. It seems like this would be something in the offseason. But in terms of a precedent, that's the closest I can think of for this discussion.
And honestly, if I'm an NHL referee now and I'm looking at the rule book and I see something like this happen, I think after this incident, I'd be more likely to blow the play dead, which I am allowed to do in the rules, but just didn't happen in this situation.
Exactly. I mean, it's the referee's discretion, and it's one of two things. I mean, it's the referee's discretion, or it's the team that doesn't have the puck touching the puck. It's almost akin to when a power play is about to happen, there's a 6-on-5 and the other team hasn't touched the puck yet before it turns into a 5-on-4, if that example makes sense. But yeah, right now, that's what it is. It's one of those two things that, must make play from stopping. But you've had fans raise questions on social media or just other places asking, what is the penalty for someone on the bench, like the head athletic trainer hopping onto the ice to stop play to attend to an injured player, or what's stopping someone from tilting the net off its moorings to stop play? Like, again, these are all really interesting hypotheticals.
Yeah. And sort of rounding into that is, like Steve said, the letter of the law there says it is referee's discretion on when to blow a play dead for an injury. Could you see the league even like mid-season just saying, hey, it is your call, maybe be a little bit tighter on that?
I mean, it's hard to say what the league would say or do, just because, you never know what goes on in meetings and in discussions with officials about, okay, how to call a game, how to look for this, how to look for that. One would believe that after what happened with Matt Calvert, maybe there's more attention being shown to this. But to say what the residual effect will be one way or the other, that's a really difficult thing to assess right now.
You are in the midst of a road trip. I know we're catching you on the last leg of it. What have you seen so far? This team seems to be just trucking along without some key pieces.
It's interesting just because let's look at the most recent game against the Calgary Flames for 40 minutes. This was a team that anyone who's ever listened to a Jared Bednar press conference, they hear him talk about, this team was skating or it wasn't skating. And what he means by that is just for 40 minutes against the Flames, you saw a team that was active in every zone, whether it's, offensive zone, defensive zone, neutral zone, whatever. They were moving the puck. They were doing things that really allowed them to kind of have control and sort of hold dominion over the Calgary Flames. But in that third period, you saw that start to dissipate, and you saw the Flames find life with those 2 goals. But really the biggest takeaway from this team is just, how do you put this? It's not to take anything away from the players they're missing, because, look, those are some big losses. But at the same time, at what point does the narrative kind of become this is just reality, and this is how they're making it work with reality? But at the same time, this is what they were doing last year. This was a team that made it into the playoffs when Gabriel Landeskog was injured, and then when Mikko Rantanen got injured. And, everybody talks so much about, well, how do you make up for these losses given that, just it's so much at once? But then the argument can be made, how is this different than last year's team, where you could argue last year's team was a one-line team? Whereas if you look at this year's squad, look, when everyone's healthy, it's a bare minimum a 3-line team, but it's still the same thing. You're still seeing Nathan McKinnon getting paired with a Swede and a Finn, and Andre Burakovsky and Jonas Donskoy. They're still being productive. But one of the bigger differences is you look at lines 2 and lines 3. Line 2, you have Nazem Kadri, who is driving play. And even though he didn't score last night, Valeri Nichushkin is getting closer and closer and closer, and he's getting into some prime real estate when it comes to scoring chances. And then when you look at what's going on in line 3 and line 4, you have a consistency with Pierre Bellemare as well as Matt Nieto. And then when you think about line 4, Vladislav Kamenev has 4 points in the last 10 games he's played since coming in for players on injury. So look, this is a team that's getting contributions. You may not know where and who it's from, but the thought is, if they're doing this now, what could this team be when everyone's healthy? The 8-1-1 start through the first 10 was an example of that. But again, there's no way to say every 10-game sequence with a full lineup is going to result in them winning 8 games all the time. But it does give you a foundation for what this team could be. And that being said, getting Philip Grubauer and Pavel Francouz back was huge, because when you look at this trip, a lot of takeaways. But another big one is this is a team that won 3 of 4 on the road in Canada with 3 different goaltenders, 2 of whom were in the AHL.
Yeah. Almost had a guy from Manitoba who had to play. Thank God Adam Werner stayed healthy. But, yeah, this is something. Like they were saying on the broadcast last night, this is going to be a problem trying to figure out who do you scratch right now. And that's a really good problem to have. How do you get these guys when guys get healthy? How do you fit them back into the lineup? And do you skate those 3 forwards together, or do you split them up and make a bunch of 3 different lines better? It's going to be an interesting conversation come healing time.
So let's start with the first part of that, in the sense of what do they do with this roster? Vladislav Kamenev really is the wild card here, because before these injuries, the thought was your center depth is Nathan McKinnon, Nazem Kadri, JT Compher / Tyson Jost, because again, you could flip a coin between who's that third line center some days, with Pierre-Edouard Bellemare being your 4th line center. That's a deeper team down the middle than it was last year, really. You could argue over the last several years. And so for a guy like Kamenev, who he can play on the wing, it's about playing him in his natural position, which you see what he can do. So now the question becomes, what happens? Because let's say everyone is healthy right now. Line 1 looks like it's just going to be Landeskog, McKinnon, and Rantanen. They could change it, but at the same time, you can keep that line together now. You don't necessarily need to break them up, and here's why. You look at line 2 with Donskoy, Kadri, and Burakovsky. Look, Andre Burakovsky is having the sort of year that, put it to you like this, he's had more goals in the last 3 games in November than he had in all of November combined in his final season with the Washington Capitals. You're talking about someone who's on pace to have a 30-goal season, if not more. But again, it's about seeing how that translates over the whole year. Jonas Donskoy, the same thing, and Nazem Kadri. at last check looked like he was on pace for about 60 to 65 points, which again is a really strong year for a second line center. But then you go to that fourth line with Calvert, Bellemare, and Nieto, again, assuming everybody can get healthy. That line, you could argue, has been one of the most consistent lines this team has seen, not only this year, but just in general with what they can do on the offensive and defensive zone in terms of how they do things. It's line 3 that's the question. I mean, you've seen JT Compher produce, but there have been games where Tyson Joseph's been in, he's been out. Colin Wilson hasn't really played enough to say one way or the other, but then that's where it gets interesting. So who do you play? Do you give Vladislav Kamenev this chance and see what he can do on the wing or at center? Or do you continue to go back to Valeri Nichushkin, who, yes, he's not scored goals, but he's continued to work hard. He can be trusted on PP2. He's been playing minutes on the penalty kill. And then, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw it last night, but I was able to post a video after the game where Nichushkin is out there working out, lifting heavy weights.
After just,
I mean, and again, like it's a sign of his dedication. And that's just it, is like this team might be injured, but you're seeing players who are so invested right now that they're going to make this a difficult decision for Jared Bednar when everybody gets healthy. And that's not even taking into account what may or may not happen as the February trade deadline gets closer.
Ryan S. Clark, you can read him in The Athletic. You can hear him now as the Avalanche insider on KOA Radio. And Ryan, we are glad to hear from you. Glad you do not have an upper or lower body injury, because that seems to be plaguing the people that you hang around with. Hopefully you get home safely, and we'll see you when you get back.
Now, here's the real question. So what happens if it's like torso? Is it just body or is it middle? Because
it's middle.
Not to be heard, but these are all questions like people have discussed. Like, so what happens if it's the torso? Is it upper? Is it lower? Is it body? And again, one of the better lines someone, I believe, asked, I can't remember if it was on this beat or another beat I was on, but someone said, "Hey, coach, is this guy still day-to-day?" And the coach responded with, "Aren't we all just day-to-day?" And there you go.
It's true. I've been suffering from a middle body injury for a long time, and it comes from the pizza that I continue to eat. So that might be
that's on you.
That's all on me. Ryan, thank you so much. Get home safe.
Hey, guys, thank you so much.
Talk to you soon, sir. Ryan S. Clark from The Athletic, just always gracious and always good to get. And he was the first phone call after all of that Matt Calvert stuff with me on that Saturday night when I was just fuming and sitting on my couch after he got some quotes from Eric Johnson, and those got retweeted. I mean, those are things that you just do not hear people in the NHL say anymore.
I mean, Eric Johnson is one of those guys that is always willing to talk to the media, always has a soundbite, and he knows how to do it. I mean, he knows how to package what he's trying to say. And so when he just sort of lets loose and starts letting the F-bombs drop live, I mean, that gets your attention, I think, more than anything else, at least for me.
I honestly hope that the league is listening to that, because I don't think he would do it if he wasn't trying to change something.
Yeah.
But if you read what we've read from officials in the league and all these people who are concerned that it changes or it could cause fake injuries that take away from scoring opportunities and things like that, let's move into 2019.
Yeah.
And get out of this game from 1980.
Yeah.
Can we? I mean, this game, I've always loved it for how tough it is, but at the same point, there's no reason for people to get these kinds of injuries or to put themselves at that kind of risk.
Yeah. And I was talking with someone on Twitter that night about all this, and one of the things that came out of that conversation was an idea of, require play stoppage when someone goes down like that. I mean, obviously people get tied up, fall over, but if they're unable to get back up immediately, requires play stoppage. If you want to address they're faking it just to break up the flow, to give their team a breather, whatever, you can do something closer to what the NFL did, which is if you are the reason why the play is stopped, you cannot come back on the ice for X amount of time.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine any of these ultra competitive guys voluntarily leaving the ice for 5 minutes in a clutch situation just to, catch their breath.
I can't imagine any of these guys leaving the ice for that reason anyway.
That too.
They're some of the toughest people and I know, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of people who embellish things.
Yes.
Yell at me, go ahead. But I don't think that someone is going to fake an injury with blood coming out of their head. That just I mean,
And hey,
I don't, to be fair,
if you pack a blood pack in your helmet to fake that, then you know what? You've earned it.
That's true. Yeah, that is for high quality staging. I'm not going to put myself in that ref's perspective, even though I had some things to say to him on Twitter on Friday night. I'm not going to put myself in their perspective. I don't know how close they were. I don't know when they saw blood. But when even Elias Pettersson is skating after he hits Calvert with the puck, skates over by him and kind of like skates around him to almost protect him in that moment.
Yeah.
How you as an official don't see that and don't blow it dead just drives me nuts. All right, we'll be right back.
Coloradans are passionate about Colorado, and at 9 News, we love to hear all about it. Call, email, or find us on social media. 9 News listens.
Got the nicest review the other day. I actually mentioned it on last week's show. C in Golden is all it said. And someone wrote to us to say that they work in a library, that they just got a new hearing aid that links to Bluetooth, and they listened to the show and left the nicest review. We gave you a shout out last week, Claire, and you emailed me this week. Clair Villano is here. Thank you so much for coming in.
Hey, my pleasure. But you should know never to ask people who have sociology degrees to give a rating or a review. Because
Really?
It's something in our DNA. We never met a survey or a request for feedback that we didn't like.
Well, you gave a lovely review. And I'm honored to get that review from you. But yeah, it apparently has to do with your degree.
Well, maybe.
I don't want to hear the other ways that you've been ripping apart the show in your head with that sociology degree. What got you interested in the show?
Well, hockey in Denver is where it's at. That's the thing for those of us who like sports as a reprieve. I mean, that's where we go for feeling good these days. Unfortunately, we don't see it. We won't go there. But and when I was beginning to feel anxious about, well, gosh, what am I going to do? I stumbled across your podcast, and I love the name From the Cheap Seats.
Well, you know where it originates.
Where you sit.
Yeah. Basically, I've had so many nosebleeds inside that building because we are so high up. I didn't know it was possible to do that in Denver, Colorado.
Yeah. So that was the first one, and then I got hooked because really it's fun. It's fun to listen to you. You also fill in education. I have been amazing people of my generation and younger saying, did you know that there's a backup goalie plan? And, telling them about this whole mechanism set up in the NHL, and every place there's an arena, they have to have it. So I'm learning a lot. First place, I have to confess.
What's the
Now,
confession?
I'm not a hockey expert.
That's okay.
Okay.
We want people who aren't hockey experts. That's just fine.
Have you got your seatbelts on? Because we're going back fast in history. The first hockey game
Let me buckle up.
Buckle up.
Okay.
The first hockey game I ever saw was in 1958 in New York City. I was dating, a West Point cadet, and spending the weekend with his folks up in New York City, and they took me to a game. So who would I have seen there? The Rangers?
In 1950, probably the New York Rangers.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're an original 6 team, so they've been around that long.
And I can still see us sitting there. It wasn't nearly as noisy as it is today. And I don't know from hockey. I have no brothers, and I apparently made some comment that did not sit well with the boyfriend's parents, because it was probably something about, why are they being so mean to each other?
Those were the days where it was rough.
And I just still remember this dirty look I got from Mrs. Handler. I didn't see another hockey game probably until the team came here in '96, and even then it was seeing it on TV.
So you're talking about 40 years in
Well,
that
I
span.
told you seatbelts.
Yeah, no, but I'm thinking like that's a long time between hockey games.
Yes, it is. I was an Army brat. I had one sister, no brothers. We moved around. We didn't establish sports affinities. We were never in any place long enough. The Army-Navy game, that was the sporting event of the year in our family. Yes, and that was why I was traumatized by sporting events.
Yeah, I'd imagine that.
Well, because we had just come back from Japan. We were living in Baltimore. My sister and I were maybe 7th grade, 8th grade. And my dad got us tickets to go on the train to Philadelphia to see the Thanksgiving. It was usually the Saturday after Thanksgiving. It's later now. To see the Army-Navy game. And Army had all the stars and all the wins, and Navy was a goat. Well, guess what happened?
What?
Navy beat Army.
Wow.
No, I'm not kidding when I say I was traumatized.
Yeah, I imagine.
We had to ride the train back to Baltimore filled with Annapolis fans. You know?
That's a nice, cozy train trip back.
Anyway, but I moved to Denver after I married my husband, who was, with much reluctance, separated from Colorado for 3 years by the Army JAG Corps. But he claims meeting me made it a little better. So I came back here, and we had 3 sons, and so you had to get into sports. So I started learning, all the little league stuff and so on. And the one son, who's my youngest, but not very young, he's 53, but he played hockey up until he had a hip replaced in his mid-40s.
Wow.
So we saw, those games at Jeffco. And
the beer league games,
Yeah, it was kind of fun.
I tried that for a very brief period of time. It did not end very well for me. It ended with severe injury, and I haven't worked my way back out on the ice. But those games are so much fun to watch because there's so much passion out there.
Oh, yeah. And really, if you've ever been to Little League games, I must say hockey parents, fans, grandparents, things like that, they get into it too.
Yeah. Pretty much. Some would argue too much.
I would argue too much.
In today's world.
I would imagine a lot of those families, it's not a cheap sport for someone to play. You've put that sort of investment in, you're going to be rooting and interested in it.
That's right. The equipment alone and the investment of time. I mean, it seemed to me the kids could use a hockey rink up in Arvada at 6 a.m. in the morning for practice.
Yeah,
so that
it's like
means
the only time.
Yeah,
it's the only time. That was the hard part with me in trying to get into hockey at such an older age was I got to go to work, and the only time I can get to the rink is, the 5:45 skate in the morning. And do I want to wake up that early?
Yeah.
That's why I haven't played in a long time.
Yeah, right. So you became an Avs fan.
Yes.
In what, that 96 season?
Yeah.
That had to be pretty exciting for you.
I was remembering there's some things, at least for me, that I can see just like they are happening again. I mean, it's like a video in my mind. Sitting in our townhouse out in unincorporated Jefferson County on a brick fireplace that had raised seat, and we had visitors, Army friends from Cincinnati, and it was the final game. And it was so much fun. It was, do you know what I mean? It was euphoric. We weren't there, but we were there.
No, everybody in this city was there.
Yeah.
You think about it, it was away, right? They won their first cup on the road.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was something about that team when they came in and that had a kind of magic to it. I know it's a team sport, okay, so is baseball and basketball and all that, but to me, and this is an old lady speaking, there's something that's not as individualistic with the hockey players. I mean, sure, they'll get a goal and they'll, shoot this stick up, but immediately it's 3 or 4 team members, pounding them on the back. And I like that.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot different. You don't see as many. You see standout stars. Like you have Nathan McKinnon now. You had Joe Sakic and Peter Forsberg at that time and Patrick Waugh. I mean, there were standouts, but it is so much. You could have a team with an all-star and no one around him, and they're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, and it's like this period we're going through now with the Avs with, who's injured today. To see different people step forward and come up with amazing things. So, yeah. And I'm going to say something also strange.
Oh, go ahead. I was
raised with radio. I mean, I can see that brown box, rectangular box, and listening to radio shows. And especially when we were in Japan and later in Hungary, radio was what you had. I don't mind listening to the Avs on the radio. I'd rather have TV, you bet. But you can listen to a hockey game. Those guys are pretty darn good. I listened last night. Well, I've been listening every night on the road trip, if I can stay awake.
Yeah.
But when you listen on the radio, you pay attention a little more, I think. And you're not being amused by pictures or colors and things like that. So,
and Connor McGahey does a pretty incredible job of painting a picture on the radio.
Oh, he does. I know this will air on Tuesday, but last night's show when he said it's Minneapolis 2, McCabe 2, because our rookie had scored
Makar,
excuse me.
Oh, you're good.
Makar 2.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was just so cute.
His goal calls are, I think, probably the best in the league. I don't know if you can find another radio person who's as unique as Connor McGahey is. And honestly, like Mark Mosier was before him. Mark called the games for years, and I almost like listening to him on the radio better.
There you go.
In fact, I will give you a hint. Whenever it comes back, it doesn't even have to come back for this. Whenever it's on NBC, even though it's on NBC and it's quality NBC programming, I always turn down the volume on the television when it's on the national networks, and sometimes I'll pot up the radio and try to get it to sync together so I can listen to Connor calling the game, usually with Peter McNabb in the booth, because when they don't have a radio or a TV broadcast, Peter goes in the booth with him, and it's so enjoyable to watch the game that way.
See, we've just given all your listeners a new way to enjoy things.
Yes.
And you should. You should be able to enjoy things different modalities.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
When the Avs first came in, my family, we didn't have the channel that they were played on. So, I would sit there and stare at the radio. And when we finally started being able to get the games, I did the same thing just because I'd gotten so used to it. Was Mike Haynes doing the radio back then, who eventually moved on to Altitude. I would do the same thing. I just mute the TV, turn the radio on because it sounded right. That's what I knew.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. Hopefully people take the suggestion.
Well,
I think they ought to give it a shot.
Their loss.
Right?
Their loss.
So how are you getting through this whole you can't watch? Obviously, you said you're listening to him on the radio, but are you a frustrated fan like the kinds that we've been running into on this podcast?
Well, yes, although you've had some marketing people on. You've had, professionals in the field of economics who have given arguments for why in the world wouldn't, and then fill in the blanks after that. And yet the lawsuit was filed yesterday. So I don't know. I have discovered a safe thing to say when you've lived a long time, which is, I don't know anything. I used to think I knew a lot. I used to think I knew what the answers were to things and who should do what and when. And now I've decided I really don't know a lot, but I'm enjoying being surprised.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think any of us really know what's going on in that situation, because I initially thought that our guy that we had on the show who talked about the regional sports landscape and the thought that the Cronkies own the network and, maybe they could take a loss on it. I thought, that seems about right. And then the DirecTV deal came through. And the DirecTV deal got me thinking maybe it is Comcast asking for a lot here. Because if you're able to make a deal with one, I thought the other one would fall almost immediately. And it seems like Dish Network doesn't even want to do regional sports anymore. Yeah. But you'd think that one would fall right after the other.
Yeah.
Because you'd think that people would switch. Yeah. And that would be enough to motivate them. But.
No, you don't understand. There's a certain segment of the population where we will do almost anything to avoid a switch in technology. Really, I mean that.
Do you fall in that category?
The apartment that I'm in now, one of the biggest things that attracted me is that it was set up with Comcast. I thought, I cannot go through another learning curve.
You just got all the buttons figured out on the remote because they're right. Huge. There are a ton of buttons on those remotes now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's I hope it all settles out. It should. I mean, it's just bizarre that it wouldn't. I went to a game last year. I only went to a game last year because my friend Linda, who is of Swedish descent, and I'm of Finnish and Irish, we are of a generation where we took our husbands' names when we married. Ergo, I am not Italian, and Linda is not Irish. So the Swedish community group had a special event, down at the Pepsi Center, and the captain, it was for his charity, and he met with us afterwards, and we got to have the photos taken, and it was wonderful, except there's always an except.
What's the except? I'm hanging on the end of my seat, or edge of my seat right now.
Because I cannot take the noise.
Oh.
Noise drives people, I guess, under 50. I don't know, maybe. But it made me remember after World War II when people came home and started having babies, and they'd bring the babies to church, and the babies would cry, and so quickly cry rooms were appearing in the backs of the church. I'm wondering if they could set up an adult quiet room.
A cry room?
A quiet room for people who would love to see it all but don't necessarily enjoy being bombarded by constant high decibel sound, even with the hearing aids
out. I would say, did you take them out?
Oh, yeah, and I had earplugs in, and I had muffs on.
You could have been on the little baby DJ camera. Do you see when they do that?
Anyway, so maybe we need up in the cheap seats, they need a quiet room.
I think that's a great idea. And I'm surprised that no one, you think about it, not only is there a segment of the population who would enjoy something like that, there are also people who may not have the ability to go, like people with a sensory issue who may have trouble in a scenario like that. I know that there are certain things around town. I think Elitch Gardens did a sensory day where they kind of tuned everything out and tuned it down so there wasn't a lot of loud noises, so kids could go and enjoy Elitch Gardens during the day. I kind of wonder if they could do something like that at Pepsi Center.
It's just interesting that noise is such a feature. Yeah. The reason I don't go to movies anymore is the obnoxious 30 minutes before the film starts with high volume ads and previews. But may I say a word about Nashville Predators, who, alas, are going through a very rough patch. I think they're at the bottom of our
They started working their way back up, although I think we smacked them back into submission with that 9-4 game.
Yeah. Well, my nephew lives in Franklin, Tennessee, and he and his wife, he turned 60 today, have season tickets to the Predators. So you can see you get a little familial rivalry, and we can text back and forth, and they'll send me a picture when they're at the games, and I'll send condolences when they lose and things like that. But it's great fun to hook up with people where you can have that kind of a rivalry going on, a friendly rivalry.
Yeah.
Do they get friendly? Because I noticed a lot of their fans who are inside the building at Pepsi Center are not the friendliest people on earth.
I think in Nashville, it's the South, you know.
Maybe
Southern
that
charm.
could be it. Yeah. Is that Southern charm?
I don't know. I'm sure I'll hear something.
The Nashville fans here have forgotten that part of it.
Yeah, they have some interesting. It's very college hockey like cheers that they do when
and
when
catfish.
People, and they throw catfish on the ice.
Even though they have catfish detectors everywhere in the building,
That
they still get in.
that, believe it or not, may be one of the most tame things that they do.
Yeah.
I mean, one of their. I think after every goal that they score, I believe the cheer is, "He shoots, he scores, you suck," and which is just like. Come
I'm
on now.
appalled.
Couldn't you be more creative than that? Like, if you're going to be a jerk, think
Yeah.
of something smarter than that.
We've got a lot of words in the English language.
Yeah.
Go figure.
I'll have to do an inquiry.
Ask
I'll
ask your son
This is a nephew.
or
Jim.
nephew. I apologize.
No. I'll ask Jim. I'll say, is it true? Can it be?
What kind of hockey fans are these down here?
Yes, I can't believe it. Anyway,
So you saw your first hockey game in the 1950s, and then you saw your next hockey game in the 1990s, and you've seen some today. How much has hockey changed in that time?
either I've gotten slower or they've gotten faster. Really, I mean, the speed at which they skate and the moves. I mean, they're almost acrobatic. I don't know. Do they take ballet lessons? As you know, you've seen some football players that do things like that in order to have more body control. I have no clue, but it just seems like it's almost bordering on an art form now with some of the newer players coming up. The other thing is the youth factor, that they're somehow able to transition, I mean, right out of college, sometimes not even, and come up and take it's a fierce game, you know. We have all these people with, as you say, lower body injuries. Did you ever find out what a doctor who could explain?
No, we were
yeah.
trying to seek one out last week, and we couldn't find one. I mean, we know that whatever happened to Mikko Rantanen had something to do with his knee and maybe a ligament in the knee. I know that if you follow Gabe Landis, do you follow Gabe Landistog on Instagram?
Well, I don't do Instagram, but I did see, thanks to my Swedish friend Linda, we found the picture of him with the baby and that thing on his leg.
the boot
on his foot.
boot.
I mean, it's a huge one. But I've never heard anything more specific.
So I think the fear is that if you give too much information, that somebody's going to go gunning for that leg, or somebody's going to go gunning for that knee, and so that's why they classify it as, like, I think they called Nikita Zadorov had an upper body injury when a puck hit him in the face and broke his jaw.
That one's not subtle.
yeah.
We all knew what that was.
But in fact, we had Ryan S. Clark on the show to talk about some of those things a little bit earlier, and the Matt Calvert incident, which I'm sure, I don't know if you were as angry as I was at that situation, but that was really something. But I think so much of this game today is lower body driven because it's all speed. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things when I started working out and trying to learn how to play hockey, one of the things all the coaches that I worked with, which I took like 3 lessons, but anyway, one of the things the coaches said was, if you ever have met a hockey player, they have trouble finding pants that fit because their thighs are so huge. They're like tree trunks because the game is so much more about speed. Whereas in the 90s when the Avs first came here, a lot of it was about that upper body strength and being able to knock someone into the boards or get into a fight and knock them out on the ice. And so that could be it.
It keeps evolving.
It does.
Yeah.
Claire, I cannot thank you enough for listening to this show.
Oh, thank you.
and for coming in on your great adventure. So if folks want to come and see you, you volunteer at the library. Which library?
Well, but I volunteer at the service center, which is not open to the public,
That's
where
true.
we package up all these wonderful books that people order, everything from the genealogy of the Martin Baker family in No Place, Pennsylvania, or, and I'm not making this up, Russian prisoner tattoos. There's
a book on that?
There's a book on that with
I'm worried
lots of color, pictures.
Why
and
someone
black
would
and
need to know that?
I have no idea. And every Harlequin romance, it's amazing.
Do you ever look through people's books and think, like, why would they be ordering something like this?
Well, of course, I would never question
Right?
someone's taste. I might just take a peek, you know.
Do you read them while you're packaging them? If you find a book that you're thinking, I gotta pull this thing open and see what this is all about.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's the nice thing about being a volunteer. I'm not, they can fire me.
Yeah. No one can
And
hold
they
you
may after this.
Yeah, they're gonna hear like, wait, she's been using her hearing aids for what?
But no, they know that. In fact, I told the sole male who works in that office, and I went up to him and he said, "Are you going to do it?" And I said, "Yeah, I already sent him an email." He said, "Oh, good, you got to tell me." I don't think they'll fire me.
Good. They should. I hope they listen.
And I'm doing my best as a one-woman sports.
I love
We
it.
appreciate it.
Try to
We may bring you in for analysis every now and then. If you're
my
willing to
God.
make the big adventure from where are you, outskirts of
Oh.
Lakewood?
You just take 6th Avenue till you bump into,
The foothills?
the foothills.
You basically just drive it right into the mountain and you're right there.
Hopefully not. They showed the pileup, wasn't that on Spear
Yeah, that
this
was
morning?
Yeah, or it was on 6th Avenue.
Or 6th Avenue.
Right
this
at
morning.
I-25, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's why I
Did that-
stay home.
Did that give you some pause about coming in today?
Well, yes. But when the sun came out, isn't it wonderful to live in Colorado?
Oh, it's
It
great.
really
Isn't
is.
it great?
It really is. I love your spirit. We need to have that on the show more often.
Thank you, guys.
Clair Villano, we appreciate it. We'll be right back.
Colorado is a sports state. The 9 News app puts all of our great stories in one place. From the pros to the preps, you'll find it all. Plus the latest Broncos update from insider Mike Quist. The 9 News app. Download it today.
Wasn't Claire sweet?
She's the best.
She's awesome. We should have her in here more often.
Absolutely.
Maybe that when we get Connor McGahey in, she can meet the man, the myth, the legend, or at least talk to him on the phone or something. So lots to talk about in Avs Nation that isn't the Calvert hit. Number one being, well, you know what? Let's start with the hockey. Why not? Let's talk about Cale Makar.
Oh, my.
Holy smokes,
Good
that
Lord.
kid. We are, as we record this now, we recorded our interview with Ryan S. Clark on Wednesday, which is why if you're watching on YouTube, we're wearing dramatically different clothes than we were before.
I figured we just did a costume change out of our wonderful folding suitcase down here.
Oh, you got something in the folding suitcase?
You
Look
know,
at that. That looks
so many different clothes you can store in the
that
folding
looks
suitcase.
awfully convenient and affordable.
It really does.
Yeah, folding
Totally worth 5 to 10 minutes of our time to discuss.
folding suitcase. Anyway, we were talking about the hockey and Cale Makar. I lost track of my thought with the folding
See, it's
suitcase.
so overwhelming.
He's just something to watch. I mean, the shots that he is hitting are incredible. The toe drag, and he's just in the right spot in the way he moves around people.
And he's making these plays that would be amazing for a veteran center, not a rookie defenseman. Like, this is something else.
Isn't he tied in the lead for rookie scoring right now?
For rookie goal scoring, yeah.
And you were talking about, I mean, a lot of people are saying he's carrying this team, although you could argue McKinnon, a lot of these depth players are helping with the team. But didn't he say, no, Claire was talking about what a team sport this is.
And, after this most recent game, which, unfortunately we lost, but he put up 2 goals, and he was asked afterward, how is he this good, this quick? And he responded basically by saying, well, it's nothing I'm doing. It's just I've got these great teammates that are supporting me. And it's like, how can you be that good at that age and have zero ego? Like, it's amazing.
When you're the guy who goes to the 7-Eleven and gets a Slurpee and says, that's my impulse buy. That's how you still have.
Exactly.
The other Cale Makar thing that we haven't talked about is during the game in Calgary. Or was it? No, it wasn't the game in Minnesota. It had to be the game in Calgary. Yes, because he was home. That makes sense. He was at home, had spent the night maybe with his parents or just went over there for dinner. And his dad tells Altitude TV's Lauren Jabara live on the air that Cale had his mom's mayonnaise chicken, mayo chicken. I can't remember if he said mayo or mayonnaise chicken. And, and roasted potatoes and it was by his request. And so I have said to the Colorado Avalanche, the fact that you have not tracked down Mama Makar and gotten that recipe yet is astounding. Everybody wants to check it out. So I researched it, and it appears to be you take chicken breasts, you rub them down with some mayo, and you put a little Parmesan cheese on top, and then toss them in the oven, which I'm not a mayo guy, but you add a little Parmesan cheese in there. I'd be in on that. That was another one of those strange things that just kind of took over Avs Twitter.
It's the weirdest things that get traction.
It really is.
It's fascinating. Don't get me wrong. I was probably one of those people like retweeting everything, but
a Swedish Avs fan posted something that really took off this week. And so much so that 9 News, based on my insistence, wrote an article about it. This very, Peter Forsberg is on a show in Sweden, and the video is just him. It's Peter Forsberg and another guy at 2 long tables with a stein of beer, sliding the beer down the table, set to dramatic music.
Very dramatic.
And I thought, this has to be a joke. This had to be for, a Saturday Night Live or something over there. No, this is an actual show where Peter Forsberg, Foppa is his nickname, and Anja Parson, who is another
Olympic skier,
Olympic skier from Sweden, take on other people. And I don't know if we have struggled to find translation of this. We've tried really hard. Where they take out other people. I don't know if they're athletes or what it is, but if you haven't seen it, search 9 News and Peter Forsberg show. Make sure you do that on Google because the search thing doesn't really work on our website. Don't tell anyone. But go to Google, search 9 News Peter Forsberg TV show, and you can go down the same rabbit hole that I've been down all week.
And our web producer did a spectacular job on that article, embedding clips from the show. It's fantastic. You will waste way too much time on
I believe the game itself is called Bar Diskin.
That sounds right.
Which it's with a bar. Tom Green put that together. That has to be what it is. We spent way too much time on it this week. Hope you will as well. The Avalanche return home after a long, long road trip.
Finally.
Isn't it about time?
It feels like forever.
I'm going to pull up the schedule for after this podcast. I know the Avs are at home on Saturday.
Host Toronto on Saturday.
Which is going to be a big game. We've talked about that with Tyson Barrie coming back. I believe Alexander Kerfoot's injured, so I don't think he'll be out there. But, Barrie, that's going to be a big welcome back.
Good player. Such a great guy.
Not quite the welcome that Matt Duchene gets these days, which was very gracious the first time and not so gracious afterwards.
It went downhill quickly.
I have a feeling that Tyson Barrie will get a very gracious welcome every time he's back in the building.
There's probably a different feel if you are traded or if you ask for a trade.
Yeah. That was such an odd. Do you remember the way that all played out?
Yes.
Where he skates off the ice. This was one of the first Avs games I think I really sat down and watched with Katie.
And it was in New York.
Yeah.
A friend of mine from college, Matt, was at that game. And he actually, I was working, didn't notice it. And he texted me, he's like, hey, why did Duchene just leave the ice? It was the strangest thing.
Someone was injured. and skated off first, and then
Followed him
Duchesne
out.
followed him. It was the weirdest thing. Anyway, he got a very nice entrance back into Pepsi Center when he came back, and hasn't been so friendly. He was like waving at the crowd when he scored that power play goal when the Preds were in town.
He's making it hard for me to keep wearing my Duchesne jersey.
Yeah, you should just stop that. So after this podcast is released, the Avs have the Edmonton Oilers at Pepsi Center on Wednesday. That's set to be hopefully a better looking game than the last time they played the Oilers.
When we're not, no disrespect to how well they perform, but when you're not playing your fourth string goalie, it might have a different feel.
It could. Potential. Yeah.
Our third and fourth string goalies did great, but you can't expect the world.
And then a home and home. So the Avalanche are in Chicago on Friday, followed by a game at Pepsi Center against the Blackhawks on Saturday. And those are all the games before the next episode of this podcast is released.
Nice calm week.
Nice calm week. Our thanks to Clair Villano for coming in and sharing some stories. 50 years between hockey games. Pretty cool to get that perspective. And we love having Claire aboard. So Claire came on the show because she rated us, reviewed, and subscribed to the podcast. We would ask you to do the same. Maybe you're a sociology major and want to subscribe to the podcast and feel the need to rate, review, and subscribe. We would really appreciate that. Our thanks also to Ryan S. Clark, the beat writer for the Colorado Avalanche from The Athletic. He also is the KOA Avalanche insider, and he was very gracious to come on and talk about the Calvert situation. Who do you want to see on the show? You can get at us at 9 Cheap Seats. I'm at Steve Stager on Twitter. He's at fake_Dante on Twitter. Is that all? That's all the stuff, right?
I think that's all.
You can also email the show, cheapseats@9news.com. We look forward to hearing from you. We want to know who we should have in on the show next. Shoot us a note. If you think something we said was completely off base, don't shoot. No, go ahead and shoot us a note. We'll read it, and we'll put it in the feedback for next week's show. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of Steve Stager and Jeff Sautel, who have absolutely no business covering sports at all. They're just fans. You can tell them how wrong they are by tweeting at the show at 9cheapseats or email cheapseats@9news.com.